welcome to Story Lab, where we dive into the mind of a storyteller to see how they mix and boil ideas and emotions to tell great stories. In this episode, we are speaking with Prathik Sudha Murali, who is a PhD scholar studying Hinduism at the University of Florida. Prathik was my senior at school and has come a long way since then. He has completed a graduate program in manuscriptology and is an expert in languages such as Tamil, Sanskrit, and Manipravalam, which is a creative combination of Tamil and Sanskrit. He has worked with British Council Library on several manuscript conservation projects and with the government of Tamil Nadu on temple conservation projects as an authority on inscriptions and temple architecture. Thanks for joining us at Story Lab. In a way, this is actually a very unusual and special episode for us because usually we speak to storytellers, people like novelists, poets, filmmakers, right? And this is the first time we are speaking with a researcher who studies ancient manuscripts, right? That is because we realize that these manuscripts, even though they are religious and philosophical in nature, they try to get their point across, their ideas, convey their ideas through storytelling. Right? So we are curious to understand from you how these manuscripts, how they use storytelling, and how it's evolved in the early and medieval stages, and because for all we know, this ancient storytelling could be the very foundation of our contemporary storytelling tools and techniques that we use today. Right. So, to just kick off a conversation with, how did you even get interested in this topic? Because this is a very niche. This is not something that would fancy someone's imagination right away.
Well, yeah, I would agree. I mean, it fancies everybody's imagination, but many people wouldn't take it as a career or something like that. That's something, yeah.
True. True.
But yeah, I mean, I never knew something like this existed. Something that you can make a living out of something like studying something like this. But I mean, as a middle class Indian, so I was an accountant in my early days, and at some point I decided, no, this is not what I want to do. This is not my cup of tea and all.
No, it's not difficult to imagine that our Puranas and Vedas are filled with stories, and so it should be naturally captivating, fascinating for anybody. True. In that direction, why do you think our ancient texts like Vedas and Puranas, why did they even bother about storytelling as a way to convey their ideas?
Mostly you have these conversations in the Vedas which can become, which is a kind of a story because it begins as a
True.
conversation, right? They're talking
Yeah.
about something, and you have something like Yama Yami Samvada, for example. It's Yama and his sister Yami who are
Okay.
talking with each other. It's just a
Okay.
conversation. The sister is desiring her brother, and she calls him to bed, and the brother
Okay.
is grappling with the morality of it all. Is it even
Right.
good? Is it bad? Can we even do this? Something like that. So this is a small story, but the story, you as you can see, is very peripheral. I mean, it's just a way to introduce something. It doesn't matter who Yama is, who Yami is, what is their background, what did they do. It doesn't matter. That bigger meta narrative doesn't matter. What matters is the issue that they're grappling with. Is it
Right.
moral for a brother and sister to be together, right? So that's what the
Mm.
society is thinking about. So the way to
Mm.
put that across is this kind of a story, for example. There can also be other things like the Dasharagnya war, for example. It is recording a war that happened,
Okay.
right? And it's just recording a war, and you can see chariots, number of horses, or whatever is happening. So it is a story, but it does not, it might not have an implication that goes far beyond that time period. Yes, historically we might know something from it, but like the Yama might hold good for anybody who's coming forward to reflect on. But this might not. The Dasharagnya war, for example, it has other stories, for example, which could be taken as allegorical, like Deva, Suraha, Sanyata, Iti Asan. Devas and Asuras are always fighting with each other. So this is a common theme that comes across, good, evil, or however you want to interpret it, but that's something
Right.
that keeps coming across, like Vritrasura, how these Asuras fight with Indra and all of that, how the gods fight demons and all of that. So these are stories that are, again, as I said, contained in small hymns. It doesn't go
Right.
big, flow into sub stories or something like that. That never happens. It just ends there. The purpose of it all is usually the yajna, to introduce some kind of a yajna and to induce people into sacrifice. So that's that's
Okay.
that's where it is. Now that period kind of moves into Vedanta, where lofty philosophical ideas are being discussed. Now, in the Upanishads, you have stories, but again, as I said, the story is not important at all. Like
Right.
you have Kathopanishad, for example, which has a wonderful story to introduce what's happening. Like, Ushan Havai Vajashravasah Tasya Nachiketa Nama Putra Asa. You have a king called Vajashravas. He has a son called Nachiketas, and he offers himself in sacrifice, and then he goes to death. I mean, he goes to the god of death, and god of death Yama talks with him, and that unfolds a huge conversation about afterlife and who is the soul and what happens and all of that. So
Okay.
now the idea, the theological or philosophical ideas of the soul and reality needs to, and the end of the soul, for example, needs to come for it to have that power. It needs to come from the mouth of death. That's the idea,
Okay.
right? But
Right.
and for
Right.
that to happen, you need some kind of a story to carry it along. But that story will kind of
Right.
abruptly end there. And then when Yama starts talking, the story just doesn't matter, because Yama will go into such detailed, in-depth philosophical stuff that, okay, the story was just to introduce that death is talking about death. Just to give that depth to
Right.
whatever, right? So that's
Right.
the context of it. So the story, yes, it's good, it's nice, but it's ultimately to for something else. The story by
Right.
itself doesn't carry that much weight. And then you have the Puranas. Now, when you come to the Puranas, yeah, you have how the Puranas develop is I mean, Puranam Panchalakshanam. Puranas have specific stuff. They need to cover certain things to be Puranas. Like it needs to have a Manvantara Kirtan. Like it needs to talk about the ages, right?
Okay.
The Yeah, and then it needs to talk about Vamshanukirtana, the ancestry of kings and things like that. So
Right.
the five essential elements to for something to become a Purana. So it becomes very codified as to how one should go about composing something like this, right? That's one thing. And then what happens is also you know who's the speaker, whereas in the Vedas definitely you don't know who the speaker is, who the listener is. But in the Puranas,
Right.
there is somebody who's questioning, saying, "Oh, I've heard about this. Oh, great sage, please let me know." And you're like, "Oh, child, you've
Correct.
asked me a great question. Sit down. I'll tell blah blah blah." So you know that
Correct.
introduction. But you know what? How that breaks into is, I'm not telling you something out of my own mind. This was told to me, or this was something that X told Y in this context, and then that X and Y's conversation lead into something. So it's like one into another, weaved together. So that's
Correct.
how it comes across. There are two. I would say there are many functions to this. One is to say it claims some sense of authenticity, in the sense I'm not just saying what comes to my mind. It is something that's been passed on. That's one thing. And the second thing is to be, oh, it's authoritative because somebody superior to me said. The third thing could be, it's not something that's new. It's something that's very old. I'm just passing it on. So it could create this sense of antiquity, even though it was not there, right? It might have not been there. So all of
Right.
this, these are tools, and then you have also itihasas that are coming up, like the Ramayana, for example. Yeah, so it's also a kavya. Ramayana is also a kavya, right? So it also becomes a
Mhm.
poetic work. It also narrates some things, and the Mahabharata, for example, also has this. Both Ramayana and Mahabharata also have this notion of dharma in them,
Right.
of
Right.
righteousness and right living. So it does have this element of preaching, but also element of narration and beauty in terms of lyrics and all of that. And these kind of prose narratives also take, I mean, in the 6th century, the 7th century, later than all of this period, what I just spoke about, kind of the Bhamaha, the poetic tradition, rhetorics, people who theorized on rhetorics. Bhamaha was a person who kind of classified these into two. One is Katha, the other is Akhyayika. Right? Akhyayika is narration of things as they happen, like historical documentations. At least
Mhm.
what was perceived to be historical documentations. And
Okay.
then Katha is completely fictional. till now I've only been, at least I have only been delineating on something that is religious, right? And that's
Mm.
again an important thing. Everything was not just religious, because whenever we think of India's past, we think of it as, oh, religious stuff. But
Yeah.
not essential. You had so much of, let's say, Avanti Sundari Katha, for example,
Mhm.
from Dandin, who lived in the Pallava period in the 7th century. Avanti Sundari Katha, as it says, Katha, it's a fiction. So it's meant to
Right.
be read as you would read a novel today, right?
Right.
And then you also had Katha Sarita Sagara from Kashmir, right? Which is
Okay.
again, Katha, which is again fiction. You're
Mhm.
just meant to read it as, I mean, there's no moral, there's no, it's not something like that. It's not meant to educate people on something. It's just meant to be your
Right.
Harry Potter of yesteryears, a million-year-old Harry
Okay.
Potter. That's just that, right?
Right.
And you'll have, yeah, you even have science fictions, like, in the sense, Avanti Sundari Katha, for example, has robots fighting in a war. Like, it's just his own imagination of something like that from
Okay.
7th century. So yeah,
Wow.
I mean,
Okay.
we need to understand that society was as complex as it is today at every point of time.
Right. Right. So, what I get from this is storytelling was used both to get across a moral, to moralize, to speak about subjects like dharma and these wars, and what people thought about them. Also, to touch upon topics that were difficult to say, explain or get across in simple, explanatory terms. Right. So, storytelling was used as medium to touch upon difficult taboo topics also. So that's actually innovative and creative because a lot of things that we do today, a lot of communication that happens today is, an attempt to tell a story and explain something because it's hard to convey that topic, by itself through technical language. So we break into a story, convey what the benefits of that particular, let's say, a technology or a new invention, so that people can easily consume it, easily understand, what the technology is all about and how they can use it. So it's interesting that we have done this, through generations of writing and Shruti Smriti. Right? It's very interesting. One of the things that you touched upon is how Yama, for example, talks about death, death talking about himself, and how one story, leads, gives way to another story. So, but these are very common tropes even today. We have, first-person narrator. We have meta stories about the subject, a story about a story. So it's interesting to think that a lot of tropes, a lot of styles from ancient storytelling is still flowing through our mainstream novels, literature, and filmmaking, even any other form of storytelling. Um, is there any specific style that's unique to ancient storytelling, which is probably underappreciated and it's not continued? We don't see today.
Style of writing, if I have to talk about writing as a form of storytelling, there are some
Mm.
styles of writing that are like we don't see nowadays. You had something called the champu, for example,
Mhm.
which was a combination of poetry and prose. So I
Okay.
mean, a lot of prose, and then suddenly, if you want to create an impact or you want to change the tone, suddenly it breaks into a beautiful poem. And then again, you go back
Okay.
to prose. You can switch whenever you want, and that's something we don't see
Okay.
today. We see
Right.
either this or that. If you take something like cinema, for example, I would say there's a lot of, I mean, yes, it's evolved a lot. It's something that's unrecognizable to say a theater form that's thousands of years ago. But
Mhm.
one distinct feature of Indian filmmaking, for example, would be how you narrate a story, but you always have this, in the West, if you see, for example, here they would say, why would a movie contain 8 songs and dance sequences, right?
Right.
That's something that's
Right.
like, okay, if it does have so many songs and dances, it's not a movie, it's a musical. Like in the West, it's
Right.
a separate genre.
Genre.
But
Correct.
for us, if you don't have songs and music, that becomes a special movie for us. Like,
Right.
oh,
Right.
adil paate illa, that does not have songs, you know.
Right.
And that,
Correct.
for example, is, I think it comes from this continuous evolution. I wouldn't directly trace it, but if you see the first kind of documentation, serious documentation of Indian theater, the Nati Shastra, for him in
Correct.
second century BC, for Bharata or whoever documented it, right, and
Hmm.
attributed it to Bharata, to him, um, Natya is not dance. Natya is
Right.
drama, and
Drama. Right.
drama needs to have dance and music.
Mm.
So, and of course, thousands of years of changes and evolutions from his documented date. And
True.
from there, it has evolved so much, but still, you see elements of a Natya, a movie having essential elements of dance and music. So, Natya encompassing Nritya and Sangeeta. Without that, you don't have a storytelling narrative. So
Right.
that's something that you do see some parallels of, of evolution, yes, but also some kind of touch base with its tradition.
So, when we are talking about ancient stories, stories of, say, Ramayana and Mahabharata, which you say delve on the topic of dharma, what's adharma, all these. Assuming that these stories were told to, get across, the meaning of dharma and how righteously we could live, what are the best practices to make sure that our lifestyle and the relationships that we have are righteous and we are doing the right things. Assuming that this was the intention, do you think that people, when they listen to these discourses in the form of stories, they stick to the story and leave out the meaning? Do you think that, people, even bad people, say criminals, could enjoy Ramayana and Mahabharata, but they don't really get the meaning of it? They stick to the story form of it, not the underlying principle or the meaning of it. Do you think that's a curse of storytelling? That's a curse of using storytelling to convey something like this, something important like this?
I don't think so. In the sense that when we presume that there is one message that is perpetual and stagnant to these stories, that's a
Mm-hmm.
disservice we do to the art of storytelling itself. I think. Because I think that's not quite the case. The Ramayana, for example, let me take your own the example that you quoted, right? So the Ramayana, for example, um, we think of Valmiki as this gold standard. Yes, it is the gold standard. He is amazing. He's an amazing storyteller, and it's beautiful as it is. Yes, no doubt. But there are hundreds of Ramayanas that are not canonical at all.
Okay.
Like, let me give you an example. Like, compare it to the West, and we can understand it better. In Renaissance, for example, right,
Mm.
when you have, like, let me take Baroque art. You have in the 1500s, right, you have artists who are producing sculptures and paintings of Greek uh, stories, right?
Okay.
Greek mythology, which are long lost. Nobody believes
Mhm.
in them. Nobody narrates them. It's not even alive. But it
Mhm.
becomes a beautiful subject because of the emotion, because of so many other factors that are connected to that character and the story, that the artist is able to produce mind-boggling sculptures and paintings, say in
Right.
Baroque or artworks. But does that mean that people have lost the meaning, or should the artist must will you say that the artist must have believed in the core of this Greek story to produce this beautiful sculpture? Not at all essential,
Okay.
right? Like, I write poetry on Vaishnava subjects in classical Tamil meters, but I don't believe, I'm not given to faith at all.
Okay.
So,
Right.
so when you, so the thing is, uh, it's not essential at all. So Ramayana, for example, umpteen number of kavyas have been
Mm.
produced
Mhm.
from the Ramayana, Bhavabhuti, or even Kalidasa's Raghuvamsha, for example, Uttaramacharita of Bhavabhuti, hundreds, I can say, hundreds. None of this is treated as religious. It is religious in the sense, if you consider Rama as a religious figure, well, it is religious. But is it treated as religious in the sense of, does anybody do a ritual or chant it for spiritual gains? Nobody does that, because it is considered secular poetry. In the sense,
Right.
use the word secular in a very loose sense, in the sense it's non-canonical, right? Religion has
Right.
not taken it as its canon. And
Right.
even Kamban, for example, you take in Tamil, right? Kamban is a very non-canonical figure.
Mhm.
Nobody recites Kamban and say does a puja or something,
Correct.
or Villiputtur or Bharatam for that matter. It's seen as a kavya to enjoy, and
Mhm.
that's where it stops. So it's very and um, each um, each person takes their own kind of thing from it. Each era takes its own version of it, right? And
Interpretation.
and that's
Right.
that's the beauty of it. That's something that storytelling does, and that's beautiful. You just take the number of Ramayanas that's been produced. Take Tulasi's version, for example. It has
Right.
so many. If you presume, if you're under the presumption that Valmiki is gold standard, Tulasi is nowhere near. He has so much of difference. I mean, the very way in which the story starts is so different, right?
Right.
Um, and then you have Bengali Ramayana, where it's a very told from the perspective of a woman, and then you have modern retellings of Maithili Sharan Gupta in Hindi, which talks about Ramayana from Lakshmana's wife's perspective, Urmila's perspective. And tomorrow there can be something that comes up from a very feminist perspective. Why not? And maybe a few years down the lane, a queer Ramayana. Why not? Right? Maybe it's sacrilegious to the religious person, but it's possible. So I
Right.
think that's how it is. Storytelling. I mean, this whole thing, presuming that something is lost, means that we presume that there is a standard, there is something that needs to be carried on with that original thing, but society
Mhm.
doesn't function that way.
That
every
way. Right.
every person
Right.
who reads it will have their own reflection on it, and that's the beauty of it.
Right. Okay. Okay. The way in which these religious, secular, or philosophical treatises, the way in which they used storytelling as a medium, did it change over time through generations? Did it change, or has it been fairly constant until the modern times?
Oh, it's changed a lot. So, there are two ways of looking at this change. Change could be, one is how the same literature is being seen through the ages. That's one way of changing. You take Ramayana, for example. The later period is going to, let's take the South India, for example, right? So the South Indian tradition, the Sri Vaishnava tradition, for example, is going to take the Ramayana and they're going to theologize the Ramayana in the sense, if you take Periyavachan Pillai, one of the commentators from 13th century, he's going to go on commenting on the Ramayana and saying, oh, you know what? Sita actually symbolizes the Jivatma, the
Okay.
the soul. And being in Sri Lanka is like samsara. Being
Okay.
in
Worldly.
samsara, yeah, in worldly things,
Right.
it's suffering.
Right.
It's separated from its husband, which is God.
Right.
and
Right.
and then India is like Vaikuntha, where God is in
Okay.
his this thing, in his own abode, but he
Right.
is suffering because more than Sita's suffering, Ramayana highlights how Rama was suffering, right? So he will say that, you see, Rama is, so God is actually yearning for you to come to him and all of that. And then
Okay.
he sends a guru who is Hanuman, who crosses
Okay.
this ocean, comes here to say that, hey, God's with
Right.
you. And he's going to carry this Rama Nama with him, which is like a mantra who's going to give it, etc., etc., etc. And 10 faces of Ravana is like 10 indriyas, 10 bodily elements which are
Okay.
troubling you. All of these allegorical interpretations. So, how
Right.
Ramayana as a story lives is it's being theologized.
Right.
So that's a change that it brings in, right?
Right.
This is one way of change bringing it. But if you take secularizing, this is theologizing of Ramayana. If you take secularizing of Ramayana, like how Bhavabhuti or any of these people, Kalidasa did, they're, yes, they know that it is religious, but they are not looking at the religious or theological angle of this at all. They want to make a
Right.
beautiful poetry. There's a good
Right.
trope. They can do whatever
Right.
they want with it, and they're doing it. And that's so
Right.
it can live, it can change in its message with the person and the intention of the person who's touching the book,
Right.
right? I think in Telugu you have something like someone who wrote Ramayana Kalpa Vrikshamu, right?
Okay.
The boon granting tree called Ramayana, and then you have
Okay.
a communist rebuttal, Ramayana Vishavrikshamu,
Okay.
Ramayana, the venomous tree.
Right.
You have something like you have Kambarasam by Annadurai, who is
Okay.
pointing out at the vulgarity of Ramayana, for example.
Okay.
Right? So
Okay.
these are, I mean, one can agree, one can disagree. That's a different thing. I completely disagree with
Right.
Annadurai's interpretation or how he portrays Ramayana. That's a different thing.
Right.
But the movie Ravanan, for
Hmm.
example, Rajini's
Correct.
Ravan, yeah. So it it is a take on Ramayana. It is
Correct.
Paranjit's take on Ramayana, right? And it
Mm.
portrays
Mm.
Ravana to be the hero,
Right.
doesn't it?
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
And a black Dalit Ravana to be the
Correct.
hero.
Right.
And
Correct.
that's a Dalit take on Ramayana, and that's as
Correct.
beautiful as Valmiki is,
Right.
as a work of art for that matter.
Right.
I may agree, I may disagree. That's a different thing. But
Mm. Mm.
2021, I think, produced a Ramayana which was a Dalit narrative. And when I look
Right.
at it from 2023, it's going to be a
Hmm.
topic of PhD. That's a
Right.
fact.
Right. So you said that different forms of storytelling also existed, like murals, wall murals, for example, drama, theater, poetry. So most of us today think that creative writing and graphic design are very contemporary forms of creative expression, but they've existed for a long time. These murals and
Oh
creative
yes.
writing. So, any interesting discoveries in your experience of analyzing manuscripts, inscriptions? Any interesting discoveries of design, creative writing that you were baffled by or you were fascinated with?
So many. I wouldn't call them discoveries because they're
Right,
already there. So it's not my
right,
discovery. It's just a discovery
right.
for me because for me
Discovery
it's
for you.
new.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Let's put it that. Hundreds, I would say. Like so
Okay.
many. You see in these bhutamala, small bhutas kind of things in temples, where you see
Correct.
see, see a lizard come and bite the penis of a small bhuta, and the bhuta is shouting, "Oh my God, what's
Okay.
happening?" This is from 11th century or something. In Kanchipuram, I remember reading an inscription which said, "There is this beautiful girl
Okay.
who's so beautiful. The whole world, every man thinks, oh, she's so beautiful, I need her. Something like that. You also think that way, but you can never catch her hand because she is your sister."
Okay.
Like that, this donation given to this temple is so beautiful. Everyone wants to have it, but
Right.
be reminded that it is like your sister. You can't.
Right. Right. Okay.
So,
Okay. So, any particular storyteller that you admire from ancient South India or ancient India? So, anyone who was creatively outstanding or distinguishable for his work from all the others.
so many, yeah.
So many, yeah, correct.
The Valmiki is someone whose work is beautiful. I mean, the way he takes the narrative forward, it's
Mhm.
like traveling with a beautiful director. Like he knows what to
Right.
show and where to expand and where to bring back.
Right.
He's a beautiful storyteller. Kalidasa also, uh,
Hmm.
the poet and as a storyteller. I think he's
Okay.
amazing. Someone that I have relished.
Okay.
Minor kavyas like Megadutam, for example. The poetry, the metrical beauty of it, Kaschit
Right.
Kanta, Viraha Guruna, the way he takes
Right.
the lyrical beauty of it and conveys through that, it's beautiful.
Right.
Tamil, I mean, Tamil also has amazing storytellers. I would again go back to Ilango more than Kamban.
Okay.
Kamban is great, but I have not relished Kamban as much. Ilango is a beautiful storyteller. The way he breaks out into, say, um, an, description of nature, for example, Nadandai Vali Kaveri, or when he narrates something like Durga being worshipped by the forest dwellers, the way he
Okay.
describes that is just so beautiful.
Okay. So, do you think creative writers of today, of this age, can, if there's something that they can pick up, if there's something that they can learn from these masters of ancient stories, ancient India, what would be one or two points that they could pick up?
I would say that people shy away from religious narrative because it's religious.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Bhavabhuti or Kalidasa did not care that Rama was a religious figure. For
Right.
they just produced non-canonical literature based on these characters in their own imaginations and in their own stories. And I think that's possible today as well. And that would enrich the Ramayana tradition, the Mahabharata tradition. Just take up characters, take up stories, take up basic premises, and
Mm-hmm.
weave your contemporary stuff. I mean, of course, I can understand the hesitation, especially given today's climate. It's going to be, how can you touch someone like Rama? That's
Correct.
precisely why we should touch Rama now.
Right. Right. To reinforce that liberty, freedom. Right.
I mean, the liberty that Kalidasa could enjoy 1,000 years ago, the liberty
Right.
that Bhavabhuti could enjoy, the liberty that Maga could enjoy, the liberty that Jayadeva could enjoy in making Radha and Krishna have sex and explicitly write about it. That
Okay.
liberty, I must have in
Is it right?
2023 what Jayadeva had in 1200s.
Right.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Mhm. So we have explored. We discussed a lot of things about stories and how storytellers used storytelling as a medium to convey their unique perspective, with their unique ideas and culture. But have any of these people written about storytelling, except of course Natya Shastra or Bharata? Outside
Oh,
that, have people written how to tell stories? Has there any been literature around that?
oh, it's a whole tradition by itself. I mean, it's a
Mhm.
whole discipline, not a tradition. It's a discipline by
Right.
itself. It's
Hmm.
called they are called alankarikas or kavya shastra, people of kavya is poetics.
Right.
It does not
Right.
remain to poetry alone.
Hmm.
It is both prose, poetry, drama, whatever, any form of
Right.
narration.
Any form. Yeah.
These are aestheticians, rhetorics,
Okay.
treatises on rhetorics. There is this whole tradition of how a narrative is written, what forms it can take, both prose and poetry, in terms of form, in terms of the aesthetic value of it, um,
Mhm.
uh, forms in the sense content, katha akhyayika,
Right.
the way it is written, arabhati riti, or the
Mhm.
manner in which the style of writing, for example, that's
Right.
riti,
Right.
you know
Right. Okay.
or vritti, for example, right? The style of writing, how do you adopt? Do you give more descriptions to the reader, or do you
Okay.
suggest stuff to the reader, stuff like that?
Okay.
So, which is more effective? And then
Right.
you also have how prose should be written in terms of these are called gadyas. So types
Okay.
of gadyas and how prose
Mhm.
narrative is built. So these people starting from Bhamaha in 7th century, Dandi in 7th century. Then you have up until Vishwanatha, Rajashekhara, hundreds of people, Appaya Dikshita, and then you have at last in the court of Shah Jahan, you have patronized by Shah Jahan, you have Pandit Raja Jagannatha who wrote Rasa Gangadhara,
Okay.
amazing treatise, and I think one of the last rhetoricians, aestheticians in the Indian tradition of how narratives are built and what's the beauty of narrative and things like that. And also they also go into um, uh, questions of psychological stuff, like how is meaning produced in this kind of a sentence, something like that, right?
Okay.
In a person's thoughts, and how does he
Right.
conceive? How do people conceive?
So, do you want to conclude this conversation with, say, a poem or a short verse from, prehistoric writing from ancient India, probably about
I can do
storytelling, right?
I,
Right.
I can do that, yes. But yeah, let me say, I didn't plan for this. So yeah, I love this beautiful poem from Mammata from Kashmir around 12th
Okay.
century. He starts
Okay.
his work on poetics. So he wrote this work of poetics called Kavya Prakasha. And he
Okay.
starts it with the shloka Niyatikrita Niyamarahitam Khladaikamayim Ananya Paratantram Navarsaruchiram Nirmitim Adadati Bharati Kavehe Jayati. So he says, may Bharati win, may the goddess of learning win. But
Okay.
which Bharati? Who is Bharati? There are two
Mhm.
Bharatis. One is Brahma's Bharati, which is Brahma's creation, which is the world,
Right.
right? And then there is one more Bharati, which is another world, which is the writer's creation,
Right. Okay.
the story. One is Niyati Krita Niyama Rahita. So when you take Brahma's Bharati, she is bound by Niyati and Niyamas, rules. Yes, this is what will happen. The sky will have stars. But in a Kavi's Bharati, in a creator's Bharati, she can say, oh, the star is walking on the street, and that's perfectly valid.
Right. Right.
She's not bound by all of
Fantastic.
it.
Right.
Chladaikamayim, that's the second thing that he says. Chladaikamayim in the sense, um, in Brahma's Bharati, in real world, you see somebody so angry, throwing stuff or throwing arrows at you, for example. You're going to be like, oh my God, let me run away. What's this person? Is he mad or something? But in a creator's work, you're reading about anger, somebody who's angry, a villain who's angry, and you're like, oh my God, how beautifully he's written this thing, right? And
Right.
even that anger is going to produce ananda in you, right? Even
Right.
anger or a description of, say, a forest fire, yes, it's going to be sad, but it's going to produce even that sadness. You read it because you want that ananda in you. So, but
Right.
if a forest fire is actually happening, if your house is on fire, not in a movie, but actually, you're going to be feared and you're going to run for your life, right? So
Right.
that's what's happening. So here again, you see the real Bharati is frightening, but even frightening in Kavi's Bharati is Ananda. So there is
Right.
only enjoyment in Kavi's Bharati. Navarasa Ruchiram. In Brahma's Bharati, there are only Shadruchis, six tastes, sweet, bitter. But here in Kavi's Bharati, you have Navarasas, Shanta,
Okay.
Bhivatsa, uh, Karuna, and all of that. So you have Navarasas. So three
Nine
more
different.
rasas
Right.
than Brahma's Bharati. Nirmitim
Right.
Madhadati Bharati Kaver Jaiti. So in all ways, in all manners possible, than the real world, Brahma's Bharati,
Okay.
the created world must win,
Right.
more than the
Wow.
actual world.
Wow.
Bharati Kavehe
Fantastic.
Jayati.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Previously, I didn't know no such storytellers existed. Such people wrote about storytelling thousands or 2,000 years ago. So increasingly, we are trying to. At least I'm trying to reinvent the wheel. But I think going forward, I'll look back for inspiration. Thank you so much, Pratik. That was a wonderful conversation.